my previous discussion, I talked about data journalism and different techniques for analyzing, visualizing data, and then developing the story. Today, I'll talk about different tools and techniques for investigative reporting, which is also data-driven journalism. So, investigative journalism is the research that exposes all relevant information to the public by locating issues that are concealed or hidden, either purposefully or accidentally, under a chaotic mass of facts and events. Investigative journalism is a kind of journalism in which reporters look deeply into a particular subject of interest, most frequently a crime, public corruption, or business misconduct. An investigative reporter may take months, if not years, together for their research and report writing. The majority of investigative reporting is done by newspapers, news networks, and independent journalists. However, other professionals prefer to refer to their work as accountability reporting or watchdog journalism. When financial, corrupt, or domineering places are exposed to protect the public interest or obligation, the adage, "the pen is mightier than sword," holds true. Investigative journalism is a type of journalism that focuses on deep diving into a story, going beyond the surface level of the facts and uncovering important information that often goes unreported. It requires a journalist to go beyond simply collecting facts and instead analyze the facts to reveal a deeper story. Investigative journalism often involves uncovering hidden or unknown facts as well as researching and verifying existing facts. It is also often used to expose government corruption, corporate wrongdoing, and other unethical practices. In many cases, investigative journalism relies on investigative techniques such as interviews, document analysis, data analysis, and research. It also typically involves a lengthy process of researching, interviewing, data collecting, data analysis, cross-checking information or sources to verify its accuracy. Investigative journalism is often conducted in depth, requiring the journalist to spend a significant amount of time on the story. It is this in-depth approach that sets investigative journalism apart from other forms of regular journalism. By its nature, investigative journalism is often difficult and time-consuming. It requires a journalist to be resourceful, creative, and persistent in uncovering the facts. So, investigative journalism is a unique and important form of journalism as it allows journalists to shed light on important issues that would otherwise remain hidden. Now, there are certain key words that surround the periphery of investigative journalism. For example, aberration, anomalies, in the socio-political system, accountability, that is governance and public servant, expose, both accidental and planned. So investigative journalism is concerned with holding powerful people, government officials, criminals, corporates, and nations responsible for their actions. Investigative journalism makes guarantee that no one is above the law by exposing corruption and malpractice. It is a deeply democratic activity built on the principles of justice, freedom of speech and expression, and truth. Investigative reporting also brings attention to underrepresented groups, providing the voiceless with a much needed stage or limelight. In the past, this has led to changes in the legislation, cultural norms, creating healthier societies with more individuals receiving respect and dignity. A piece of investigative journalism does not read like a normal news item that follows 5 W's and 1 H. It also does not have to be as short or use as simple language. While there are no hard and fast rules for producing or developing an investigating story, with tone and language left to the individual's narrative style, the in-depth critical character of investigative journalism gives it several broadly constant qualities. So among those most constant significance or qualities are, first is it's a long form content. It has to utilize infographics, tables and charts. Statistics or quotes are abandoned in investigative journalism. Even if these elements aren't always there, the in-depth structure of investigative journalism causes the pieces to swing in those areas. Investigative journalism requires an open atmosphere of press freedom. Citizen having the right to access government records or public records through RTI, Right to Information Act, and respect for the media. The United States is regarded as the forerunner of this genre of investigative journalism. Following relative neglect of the practice after the demise of muckraking journalism at the start of First World War, a renewed interest in modern investigative reporting among US journalists began in 1950s and grew slowly and intensified during 1960s. So, the inception of investigative journalism is all about social reformation. So, the origin of investigative journalism can be traced back to the 19th century when journalists began to take on the role of social reformers. Publications like the New York Times and the Chicago Tribune started to expose corruption and injustices in society. One of the earliest examples is the work of Nellie Bly, who in 1887 went undercover in a mental institution to expose the horrific conditions faced by the patients. Her groundbreaking expose brought the significant attention to mental health reform in the system. From 1930 until mid 1960s, newspapers throughout the United States intermittently published investigative articles which usually concerned with the exposure of local corruption. Moreover, small circulation, ideologically committed political journals and newsletters such as New Republic, I.E. Stone's Weekly, and Nation regularly provided readers a story of expose on national issues. And the nationally syndicated column Washington Merry-Go-Round reported investigative stories by Drew Pearson and Robert S. Allen. Now there comes the muckrakers era. I have talked about muckraking journalism. So the early 20th century saw the rise of the muckrakers, a group of journalists dedicated to uncovering corruption in politics and business. Figures or personalities such as Upton Sinclair, whose novel The Jungle exposed unsanitary conditions in the meat packing industry, or Ida Bay Wells, who investigated lynching in America, which exemplified the power of investigative journalism. Their work not only informed the public but also led to significant legislative changes. So, the impact of muckrakers on society, although the muckraking is used in a derogative term, which means digging into the mud, the post-war investigations revealed that muckraking journalism was required, the necessary need of the time. So following Second World War, investigative journalism gained further prominence or momentum. The 1970s marked a significant turning point with the Watergate scandal, where journalists Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein of the Washington Post uncovered a political scandal that ultimately led to President Richard Nixon's resignation. This event solidified the role of investigative journalism as a watchdog of the democracy or the democratic functioning of the governance, and inspired a new generation of journalists. During the 1960s and 1970s, social and cultural unrest, new technologies, including the growing influence of television news or television journalism, the rise of anti-authoritarian underground newspapers, and new laws and legal opinions that freed journalists of previous restraints on the practice, combined to provide a fertile ground for investigative journalism in the United States. Newspapers created special investigative teams led by Long Island, New York's Newsday, and the Boston Globe. By 1975, investigative journalism had evolved into a mature, viable practice in the United States that was part of but distinct from conventional journalism, and in the 1980s, it became an institutionalized standard of excellence for US journalism. In the mid 1980s, a survey of newspaper editors and television news producers found that most viewed investigative reporting as a responsibility of the news media, and IRE, the National Service Organization for Investigative Journalists, enrolled more than 4,000 reporters and editors as members. In Canada, Great Britain, Australia, and other Scandinavian countries, investigative journalism has been practiced sporadically by the news media since the end of Second World War, with increased sophistication and acceptance of the practice since 1960s. In Great Britain, the country's Official Secrets Act restricts investigative reporting on national security matters, though internal political exposes are frequent. Investigative fare in both print and broadcast media. Investigative journalism in Europe's democracies, while widely practiced since the 1960s, remains restricted by the law and custom of that particular country. European countries had limited access to government records, requiring investigative reporters to rely primarily on leaked documents and anonymous sources. But after the fall of Soviet Union and the democratization of Eastern Europe in 1990s, interest in investigative journalism increased but was stilted by limited freedom of the press. Moreover, in some countries, notably Russia and its former republics, criminal elements used violence to suppress reporting about government corruption and organized crime. Indian journalism took the investigative route with hesitant yet effective steps. The government and media organizations gave little importance to investigative journalism. It is only after the emergency that investigative journalism gained importance within the efforts of a few committed journalists. Several journalists, such as Arun Shourie, challenged the might of then government and thus had to pay a price. The socio-political conditions of the country helped the growth of Indian investigative journalism. Later, the work and effort of journalists institutionalized investigative journalism in India. The lives and times of these journalists can throw light on the development of this genre in India. If we study the works of major investigative journalists in India, also the media history of the period, in bringing out the unique contribution of the journalists can be more open and transparent. In the art of statecraft, Arthashastra is one of the fundamental and historical books written by Chanakya. According to this ancient text, even the honesty of judges should be periodically tested by the agent provocators. Arthashastra can be called as the best example of investigative journalism in ancient Indian history. It can be said that modern day sting operations used in investigative journalism derives some sort of authority or legitimacy from the writings of Chanakya. After getting freedom from the British colonial rule, our leaders promised us a free press. Even those tall promises regarding the freedom of speech and expression, especially press freedom, also has been granted in our constitution in Article 19 and 19(1)(a). Paradoxically, Indian constitution nowhere gives any independent provision regarding press freedom. It is considered to be the part and parcel of Article 19, whereas American Constitution specifically provides a right to press. The historian Robin Jeffrey has pointed out that the first Constitution, US Constitution, guaranteed freedom of speech and the press. The first amendment to Indian Constitution passed in June 1951 curtailed those rights. It permitted governments to ban publication of material likely to disturb the public order, incite people to commit a crime, as harm relations with foreign powers. Now, I will give an overview of the key skills and techniques used in investigative journalism. So, investigative journalism requires a variety of skills and techniques in order to uncover the truth and tell a story that is both compelling and accurate. So, experienced journalists must be able to gather and analyze information, identify reliable sources, and then craft compelling stories. So, an overview of the key skills and techniques used in investigative journalism can be like this. The first is, of course, information gathering. So, gathering information is a fundamental skill for journalists, as it is the core of investigative reporting. Journalists must be able to identify and interview reliable sources. They have to build rapport with the sources and then build trust with the sources. Then they have to conduct comprehensive research and analyze data. It is also important for journalists to know how to access public records and database, as this can provide an array of information that may not be available through other sources or openly available in the public domain. The second important skill set that investigative journalists must have is analytical thinking. Investigative journalism requires analytical thinking in order to make sense of the gathered information and uncover the truth. Journalists must be able to interpret data, draw conclusions, and identify the patterns of the wrongdoings. They must also be able to think critically and ask the right questions in order to get to the bottom of the story. Then, source evaluation. Being able to evaluate sources is an essential skill for journalists, investigative journalists. It is important to be able to identify reliable sources and to recognize when a source is not credible. So journalists must also be able to assess the credibility of a source's claims and then determine if the information they are providing is accurate and truthful or biased or had certain hidden agenda for publishing. Then, storytelling technique. Investigative journalism is all about telling a compelling story. Journalists must be able to craft a narrative that is both engaging and informative. They must be able to structure the story in a way that is easy to understand and draws the readers in. Then the research skills. The research skills are essential in investigative journalism as they enable journalists to uncover new information and uncover the truth. So, experienced investigative journalists have developed a range of research techniques that they employ to gather data and information to support their stories or evidence to support their story.